I think the best brands and advertisers, there's still this power of that beautiful, creative, and thoughtful, human-driven, insight-driven, something that cuts through and really differentiates. I think that's going to be the big differentiators for marketers, and the only thing, honestly, that will keep us from getting replaced by AI.
Welcome to the Believe in Brand podcast. In this episode, I have an awesome conversation with my friend and really someone I look up to in this space, Ruslan Tovbulatov. Ruslan is the CMO of Gloat, the work orchestration platform. And Rus and I got to work together on Gloat's brand back when I was head of brand messaging at Atreo before my time at Island. And I remember it as one of the most impactful projects of my career, really a defining moment in my career in some ways. And a lot of that has to do with Rus, who was this amazing partner in educating me and helping me understand how to get the best out of that project for them. And in this conversation, Rus talks about that project and what that meant at the time, and his work building Gloat from really quite a small company to this giant enterprise. He also shares some stories about his time working at Google and partnering with some of the biggest brands on earth and the lessons that he learned from that time on what it means to build a brand the right way. We talk about the importance of seeing brand as building a movement, the long-term factor, the investment that doesn't see returns right away, but that needs to be developed over time. And we also talk about some amazing events that he's been able to put on and the brand experience factor that makes those events stand out and generate outsized impact for their company. It's a wide-ranging conversation from someone who is really one of the best in the business. I can't wait for you to listen to everything Rus has to say. So without further ado, here is Rus. Let's do this. All right, Rus, I feel like this is years in the making. So happy that you found the time to join the Believe in Brand podcast. I feel like we could have a 17-hour episode here, and we're going to try and pack it all in, but really great to have you. Welcome.
Yeah, glad to be here. I'm a big believer in brand, big believer in Ari, so I'm excited to be here. We're going to have a good conversation.
Awesome. So you are the CMO of Gloat, and we crossed paths at, I think, important inflection points in both of our careers when you were really taking the Gloat brand to this whole other level. And I was back at the agency at Atreo doing some heavy B2B branding there. And we worked on this new brand project together. And it was one of the defining projects of my career. I remember very clearly to this day. I'd love to reflect, like, for you, that was a moment where you were really deciding to build category, to kind of double down on this idea that we're going to claim a name for this thing, right? In the HR space, the workforce agility platform, there were several different terms being thrown out. I would love for you to reflect on kind of the origins of that movement and what it's done for you and for the company to be a category builder and to really focus so much on brand building over the past years since then.
Yeah, it was an amazing project. And obviously we've kept in touch just because I admired the work we did together so much. And you were such a big part of the Gloat story. Just for those that don't have the context, Gloat, when I joined, it was about 2020, I think, and we came together around that time. And Gloat had done something really interesting. It was built on a simple concept, but a really important one, which was there are a lot of people out there that want to find their next opportunity, and they think that the next best job for them is outside their company. But the reality is a lot of times it was within the company. And so that we built something called the internal talent marketplace that really took Gloat to the center stage in a way. And we had some really marquee clients that started working with us. But when I joined, it was just a few referenceable customers. I think we were like 60 people or so, just a few $1 million ARR at the time. The goal for me as I jumped on was, let's make this thing explode. How do we take it into what we really believe it can be? And we knew part of that journey was just telling the story in the right way. How do we show up in the right way to conversations, right? Not just as a product that solves a use case or two, but something that is bigger than just a product, that is almost like there's an identity tied to it, that when someone invests in Gloat, they're basically sending a signal to their teams, to their employees, that they believe in a new way of working. And we had a big vision for what it would become. But when you're just in one space as a product company, it's hard to tell that story. So what we came together to do was say, how do we take this vision and make it come to life? And so that's where this idea of a workforce agility platform, not just a talent marketplace, came to life. That's where we explored the visual identity. And then we had this interesting brand concept, which was that we help people move from one thing to anything, and organizations transform from one thing to anything. And it was anchored in this idea that all of us somehow are stuck in one job or one job title or one career path. And even organizations, right, are defined by one thing. And the reality is the best companies, just like the best individuals, they evolve and grow beyond that one thing. And we wanted to be the platform for that. So at the time, the brand campaign was all around that, the one thing to anything. And then the platform name we gave it was Workforce Agility. And it really carried us through for many years as we got into tens of millions of dollars of ARR and hundreds of brands working with us. And so it's been an amazing journey anchored on that. And now, as you know, we're actually about to unveil the next iteration of that, working with some of our old friends at Atreo again. But yeah, it was an amazing start to that. And you really helped us accelerate to get to where we are now. And we're excited for the next phase.
Yeah, it's really a remarkable story. And I remember vividly that I really needed to sell you on this idea of the anything workforce. You guys, if I remember, were not accepting of it at first. And then I'm like, okay, I really need to put this argument together. And I knew there was something special there. And you guys really took it. And I think this is an important point to make, because it's one thing to kind of have the idea. It's another thing to take that and actualize it or operationalize it into what the movement ends up becoming. And I like to call it a movement. I know my guy, Carmel at Atreo, uses that word all the time, that you're really building a movement, and the people who you end up, whether they're your customers or your target audience, your fans, they're really your followers in a sense. And that's really what you guys did so beautifully, led by you. But it's one thing to have these phrases and to have a story, and it's another thing to use it and to actually drive equity, brand equity through that story. And we reflected a little bit ago about how not every time do you get handed the assets and say, okay, I know exactly what to do with them, or I know that I can do something with them. What was it like to see all of that handed to you and have to figure out what to do with it?
You guys did a great job of giving us the template and the baseline and the foundation, but in a way, yeah, the real hard work comes in the activation of it. I think the movement has to start from within always. I think Atreo knows this well. The best agencies know it, where it's not about the old school approach of a great 60-second spot or a billboard or a print ad. That was all push messaging. And I think what's changed now is that you really have to start internally with your advocates within the company. And then any of the people that are already invested. So when I think about starting the brand, it starts with your employees. So how do you take that brand narrative, the visuals of the brand, the messaging, and empower all of them? And there's some tactical things like, how do you ensure everyone's background on LinkedIn is evoking that message? How is everyone's signature, their Zoom background? And I was really proud of that, actually. People noticed that for weeks and even months. Even to this day, people comment on how gloaters will show up really consistently on LinkedIn or in Zoom backgrounds, because that's kind of sending the message. If your own employees don't believe in it, then your prospects certainly won't. And so I always start thinking internally. The other piece a lot of people forget is other people that have already literally invested in you, the investors, the advisors, your board. How do you keep them engaged and interested and really up to date? Because they can become tremendous advocates and ambassadors. And then I think about customers from that lens too, right? You already have people that are purchasing you. And so one of the things we did so well, I mean, it's kind of the playbook now, but it was so important for me when we were launching the new brand to send brand kits to every single one of our early customers, because we wanted them to be part of this rebrand and part of the launch. So we sent them a champagne bottle with the new logo and the new branding. And it was a way to, almost activate that part of the community. And then, of course, you bring it to prospects and the mass audience. But to me, what you said is so important. This idea of a movement has to start with the people that are already closest to you, and it's kind of inside out. And the hard part is taking that brand identity deck and all the great work you do creating a brand Bible or brand book, and then creating those specific assets for each of those audiences and having them activated. I'm no saying we didn't do everything perfectly, but I'm quite proud of what we achieved for that rebrand.
That was perfect, because this to me sheds light on something so critical, especially in the B2B space, for how companies think they're doing branding, but they're really just doing marketing, and branding is a different art. So much of your answer about how to activate a brand, even after you get the assets, you need to really think about how you're going to activate it. So much of that had to do with people other than prospects, meaning people that weren't going to bring you revenue, but which is why brand often gets thought of as like the ultimate cost center, because you can't even measure if you're making money off of it. You're just spending so much of it, right? But the way to really build a brand is to not think about it as how is the dollar in out going to get me a dollar in, but how do I rally a company around the movement? How do I rally investors to continue to believe in me? How do I get my customers to fall even deeper in love with me and to be my ambassadors? And if I have that kind of echo chamber or just this centrifugal force,
like a flywheel almost.
Exactly. Then anytime you just touch outside of that ecosystem, it's going to be this huge boom, because the minute the Gloat brand shows up anywhere, all of these different communities within, around your brand and within it are going to be happy to jump on it and amplify it. And it has to end with the revenue side of it, not begin. And often,
right, exactly.
Often marketers who have a bottom line to report to and have a CFO breathing down their neck, they're the ones looking at brand and saying, how do I make sure this is going to get me that number? And they think of the prospects first. And what you described is really the way. And I hope that's a lesson learned that to you was obvious because you know what you're talking about. And to others thinking like, okay, but what is this brand going to do for me? That's what that means. So really happy you.
I think it does require, it requires the confidence to know that it's a long-term investment for sure, right? I think that's the risk that sometimes the brand conversations run. It's almost like the convenient way to think of it as like brand and demand, right? And demand is kind of that short-term growth mindset, like how do we get leads and make sure we're creating pipeline in the short term. I think brand, if you have the right CEO and the right kind of leadership team that's been around, I think they understand that there's a longer term investment happening there. And then it's also this halo effect. It's like air cover for everything else you do. And so I think it's really important to think of it in that way. I do expect brand absolutely to drive revenue, just like you alluded to. But I think it's not going to be that immediate, dopamine hit you get of just launching a lead gen campaign and getting people to download some assets or even book a few demos. This is like building a relationship for the long term and establishing the promise you're going to make to people and the identity. In enterprise, it helps a lot, right? Because we're selling for multi-year relationships. Like I just had a conversation with someone where one of our customers is asking for a presentation to inform their 2030 strategy. And that's normal. Like, that's not surprising to me, right? In true enterprise, you're choosing a partner for 5, maybe 10 years, right? Like, that's the back of their mind. If you're high enough in the executive chain, it's not a 6-month trial or a 3-month trial you're dealing with. And so in those situations where you're dealing with multi-year deals and really big investments from large enterprises, you almost have no choice but to think about the brand and the long term.
If you combine that with the fact that often when you're selling to enterprise, you're selling to leadership, they're not clicking on display ads. They're not behaving like consumers. So the idea that we're going to kind of do classic funnel marketing to C-level, to senior directors is kind of a fantasy, even if that's the easiest to measure and easiest to attribute. And it just leads you to believe, like, if I'm building the relationship and they're not going to be up for being marketed to, I need this route to be kind of serve as both the brand and the demand, because I'm going to do demand through brand, essentially. So you mentioned your background in Google, and that's no small thing. That was years that you spent, and not just working in Google, but working with the biggest brands in the world in Google. And that's, I imagine, one of the coolest things that could happen to anyone who loves tech and branding. I'd love for you, first of all, to just tell us what that was like, even though it was years ago by now. and then how that compares to what's going on now as more and more B2B tech brands are waking up to the fact that this isn't just a nice to have. This isn't even just critical. This is like our motion, right? There more and more you're seeing that, you could go to RSA, which is this big security conference in San Francisco, and you'll see massive booths where there aren't any product demos happening. You're just getting a brand experience and that's it. And they somehow convince themselves that, several $1 million towards just the 3-day brand experience is a good idea, right? And that's the shift we're seeing. I'd love for you to reflect on that as someone who was kind of seeing that early on and how it changed now.
Yeah, you had your fair share of amazing brands you've worked on and experiences too. I think the work you all did at Atreyo was phenomenal. And really, I think pushing the boundaries for some of the new age brands and everything you're building at Island is so great to see. I think you're inspiring the next generation of brand builders too. I got really lucky early on in my career. Somehow I fell into marketing from day one, even in my internships. But I started at Kantar Retail, spending all my time understanding consumer mindset and consumer behavior. So I was doing shop-alongs and ethnographies and literally going to people's homes and seeing how they behave and how they use Febreze and how they buy pet food. And that was amazing because I really tried to understand consumer behavior. And so everything I do in marketing since then, and I actually think it's the most important thing marketers can do, is really thinking about the consumer psychology of things, because the tools and technologies might change, but at the end of the day, as long as humans are making decisions, which might change and I'm thinking about over time, but while humans are making purchase decisions, at the end of the day, there's a human psychology element that's driving all of it, and that has never changed. And so I think brand ties into a lot of that. And as I got into Google, I started working on a team called Brand Lab, where the goal was literally, it was an incubator to take top, let's say 250 of the world's biggest brands and help them understand digital, right? So these are companies that were spending really billions and billions of dollars a year on TV, but they weren't really embracing digital in that big of a way. And so how could we convince them and show them the power of digital, YouTube and display and interactive formats and all these cool things you could do in search, et cetera. And so I worked with Disney and Anheuser-Busch and Procter & Gamble and Unilever and also up-and-coming brands like Airbnb and Beats. And we went deep with them. We got access to their entire brand books, brand Bibles that were this thick, just with all the consumer research, and they were so serious about their brands. If Coke was in the room, you have to make sure there's no blue or vice versa. And so these are brands that take their identity so seriously. And some people might look at that and think it's silly. I respected the hell out of it because these are some of the most iconic brands that could have died 100 times over already, but they continue to withstand behavioral shifts. They continue to withstand crises around the world, geopolitical issues. I think that there's a respect for these brands across the world. Like a Coca-Cola still conveys some sort of meaning around the world, and I just respect that. So I had a lot of fun learning from them and also teaching them a lot of things about digital, because these were traditional brand builders that actually didn't really understand the power of digital in all these things. I'll give you just one example where creatives coming into the room, and we would work with the media and creative agency. One of the scariest things was this idea of a skippable ad format and this idea of a digital unit that wasn't confined to a 30, 60, or 90, because these creatives have decades of experience creating the perfect 60-second spot. They know exactly how to do it. But all of a sudden we were telling them, oh, you can have it be 5 minutes or you can have it be 10 seconds. And that was like so frustrating. But then there was this group of creatives that embraced that. And those became the 72 and Sunnies and some of the the iconic advertising agencies of our generation, because they adapted to that and they saw the power in that. All of a sudden you can get, literally we would show for every impression, you could see the audience retention curve. And, as a creative, you never had access to that. Now you scale that to every advertiser. Like you launch an ad and you actually see where people are dropping off or where people are rewinding. And that was amazing. And it also led to this creative work like Dove Sketches. That was like a 4-minute advertisement, one of the greatest things Dove had ever done. But those things couldn't exist without the technology. And so that was a really fun place because I learned a lot about this mix of art and science, which I think now brand has necessarily become, where I don't think you can just be a traditional brand advertiser and say, oh, we just do out of home and we do a TV spot. it's all about actually using art and science together. And so like kind of what we were alluding to, I expect brand to drive growth, and I expect to look at my brand efforts and connect with my demand gen team and see how that's impacting certain things like organic search or organic traffic. Are people searching for new terms we're introducing or new campaigns? How is the interplay between the video assets then driving people down the funnel when we do multi-touch attribution? Like those are the types of things that I think you almost have to be thinking about as a brand advertiser now, especially at our scale. You have to drive certain growth numbers and ARR growth. This idea of art and science together is a huge opportunity. I think brand becomes more important than ever before in this world, but I'll pause there for now.
Well, the art and science thing, I think, is really, you could see it as like, there are those that see the combination of those two as the all powerful, right? The sum is greater than the parts. And those that see them at odds, and that you kind of need to choose one over the other, or like there's just the left brain and the right brain. That's it. There's no brain, right? And I think you mentioned like back then, these huge consumer brands were painfully aware of how important it is to respect the value of their brand in terms of its ability to drive revenue and for their business, even if they can't measure any particular ad or billboard. I think it's gotten way more complicated in our time. I actually don't think, I know, because of how easy it is to measure other things. And how, meaning when investors say, I want to see a number by the end of the quarter, they could say that because they know you could actually do that and show them. And if that wasn't possible, then they wouldn't expect it. And because we have all this technology and our ability through digital to really understand what works and what doesn't, there's this overcorrection, and there are people talking about it on LinkedIn, towards do what works and screw the rest. And that's where people, I think, forget the place of art in the science and how crucial it is. I just saw yesterday as a great example, and I commented on it on LinkedIn, there's this interview Mark Zuckerberg just did where he talked about, he sees in the near future for Facebook ads, you don't even have creative. You just tell Facebook, here's the outcome I want. And Facebook, using AI, will just kind of iterate until it gets you the outcome. And to me, it's like death of art, that we've totally lost sight of what we were actually trying to do in the process. And we just needed the lead. We just needed to put it on the sheet at the end of the quarter. And we forgot what we, like you just said, we're building relationships. That's a thing. That's not a simple part of this. And there is a world, or there are pockets of this B2B universe where that is getting completely lost.
What's funny about it is like, I feel like the older I get, the more jaded I become. And I hate that I'm becoming the old jaded guy.
Get off my lawn.
Funny enough. Yeah, literally. Like, what's funny about it is I read that Zuckerberg announcement. It's like, we've been talking about that for 15 years. When I was at Google, that was the whole idea. DoubleClick was trying to do this even then. And we were running these experiments. We even had a case study with, I think it was L'Oreal. They were using dynamic ads. And they basically were saying, like, you just put in, literally click a button, and it was dynamically generating the ads creative based on all of the data that Google had on you. And I even reflected back then, I think that no matter what, this idea of mass personalization, even though it's now more possible than ever before, I think there's a reason still that there's a Super Bowl spot. I think there's still power and magic in that one story, that one creative that touches as much of humanity as possible. We still want a shared experience. And as a marketer, if you can tap into scaled kind of zeitgeist and influence as much of a market as possible with the right message that cuts across and like really taps into the human insight that really cuts deep, I think that's still going to be the differentiator. I do think for small and medium businesses, which I think Facebook and Google continue to want to own, the idea of being able to click a button and generate more revenue is a beautiful thing. There's so many businesses that just don't have access to a designer or a creative or a copywriter. And so I like the idea for enabling growth at scale for the mom and pops. But I think the best brands and advertisers, there's still this power of that beautiful, creative and thoughtful, human-driven, insight-driven, something that cuts through and really differentiates. I think that's going to be the big differentiators for marketers, and the only thing, honestly, that will help us from getting replaced by AI.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point to overgeneralize on the fact that categorically that technology-driven personalization is just categorically wrong or bad. That's not true. There are companies that will succeed because they have that superpower, and maybe it will get them through a stage in their life cycle where they can get to the point where they're doing more of that story-driven, advertising. So that's a very important point. I do think, though, when it comes back to the world we're in, where it's enterprises, where it's long-term relationships, where you're not just buying a technology, you're buying a partner, you're buying into a partner, and there's humans on both sides, literally, that you are interacting with in order to make this work. That's where the part of branding is not just, will you do the deal, but it's, I need you to know about me. And what's interesting is, as you were talking about hyper-personalization, think about what hyper-personalization is. It's me saying, it doesn't matter who I am. It matters to me that you're seeing yourself, or that you're hearing what you need to hear in order for you to do the desired action. And who I am is not really the point. Or you don't really ever meet me in this experience, because you meet just whatever version I need to be in order to be you. Like, think about, like, in high school, we all had those friends who, like, you never really knew them because they were just the version of themselves they needed to be in order for you to like them. And you're like, who are you? And to a certain degree, we all do that. So that's where I think, like, we lose sight of the fact, like, did I get the lead? Yes. Am I driving business? Yes. Are people meeting me? And what's the value of that? If they don't, that's where I begin to wonder, or where we could start putting, like, planting the flag on the real value of brand marketing, where I'm teaching you about me more so than I am presenting a product or a solution.
Yeah, I'll share like two things on this actually, because I think about this a lot. One is just the evolution of brand just from the beginning. We used to study this a lot when we did the brand lab, which is the origin of the word brand is literally the word brander from Norse languages in the Viking times. And it started as just a way of symbolizing ownership of cattle and livestock, right? So the idea was ownership. And then it evolved as we got mass production and people started selling, whether it was livestock or goods, it evolved into a sign of quality. So it went from ownership to quality. And what I think it's evolved into, especially in the digital age, but it started way longer before then, is a sign of identity. When you buy a brand, you're saying that this is a symbolism of me. And that's exactly this idea of community and movement and all these things we've been talking about. And I think that you're absolutely right. In B2B, it becomes so much more important. This is another thing we used to study, because one of the things that always drove us crazy is that people would say that B2B was all about numbers and metrics and appealing to the head. I think anyone that's been long enough doing this knows that's not true. B2B purchase decisions are much more emotional than B2C. And one example actually, like the leader of the team at the time gave that I stuck with me forever, shout out Kim Larson, if she ever listens to this. She said something very simple that just stuck with me. You know, when you purchase a Coca-Cola as a consumer, it's pretty easy for you to switch from Coke to Pepsi. And yes, people make a big deal about being one or the other, but no one's going to kill you for it. If you're deciding to purchase Coke or Pepsi to stock every single shelf at Google or in a stadium, if you're the procurement officer, that now you're like literally telling the company, I believe in it so much that I'm making this decision for tens of thousands of people. Now imagine that for software. Oh, this guy brought in Gloat or Island. Like, we're going to hold you responsible for that decision. And so I do think this idea of identity is actually so tied to this idea of emotion as well. And that's where it is so hard to create a dollar value to that. I do agree that measuring that is really hard. But this idea of creating a champion, I don't think is built based on a document ad on LinkedIn, you know, or one research report you do. It's something that's built over time and multiple touch points and the identity that they see of your brand and whether that aligns to theirs as the champion for your brand.
Yeah, that's so well said. The way I think of it, especially just after being on the selling side or on the revenue side of it, go-to-market side of providing value, like kind of going through a proof of concept for a prospect, that's table stakes. If you're not delivering, if you're not solving the problem, there's nothing to talk about. It's the crossroads moment for, is there a conversation or not? You know, obviously there's a journey there to even get to that point, but if you don't do that, there's nothing that's going to save you. But once you do prove value as a product, then it turns to this other kind of question of like, and I've seen this because we've optimized for this in our target audience. Can I see this as part of my legacy? Island is being sold to CIOs, to CISOs, primarily more to CIOs now because of how foundational it is as the workspace of the enterprise. They might be gone within the year that they buy it. These guys move around.
Mm-hmm.
And what's cool is several times we've had CIOs of major companies that I cannot disclose today buy Island, implement it, and shift to the next enterprise and celebrate the fact that they leave the legacy of having brought Island to that company as kind of the hat they're hanging on, the thing that they could define their time there. And if we're not that cool thing, and obviously, again, the value has to be where it starts, but if they're not proud of the partnership that they have, and that includes the people of Island, and every time you see Island, does that sit well with you? Like, that's my guy. They're not necessarily going to feel as excited to call you their kind of legacy defining moment. And they're about to go to the next place and get on the phone and bring Island there too. And so you're making double, right?
Yeah,
so
nothing
that's
better
really
than that.
Exactly. So we've seen that many times already. And that's really just another important kind of unspoken value point. Doesn't show up in the quarterly, right? But it just shows you how important it is, where the relationship of it and all of these little touch points, which is maybe the next thing I want to talk to, that last 10%. Let's get to that. All of those things add up to, yeah, this is me. This is what I want to be known as, or this is what I want to define this chapter of my career by. Very cool.
I love that. Yeah. And I just one comment on that before we get to the last 10%. What you just said is so important. There's nothing more special than someone leaving the enterprise and then saying, oh, I'm proud of the work we did here and I'm going to bring it to the next one, which is why companies like User Gems are so successful now. I think there's a whole market being made of that. The other piece on that, I'll just give you an interesting little thing I think you'll appreciate. One of the things that I actually look at, because to the idea is I don't want them to just be proud of buying it. I almost want to get those people promoted and create champions. One of the things I look at is when you search the image of one of our champions on Google Images, are there gloat photos that come up from our events or things that we enabled for them? So did I get someone on a podcast or did I have them at one of our speaking engagements? And I've seen that time and time again, where some of the people that are our champions, like on Google search, all their images are actually gloat images. And to me, that makes me so proud. And it's not even them promoting Gloat a lot of times. It's just like we are giving these people a platform because they're change agents. They're creating this movement that we really believe in the future of work being better than the way it was before. And it's amazing to see us being the platform for them to get promoted, to be a voice in the community, all of that. And then that's what enables, I think, some of that pride.
Yeah, it's almost like I love thinking of unconventional ways to measure brand. It's almost like my favorite little little
Yeah, that's
quiz.
definitely one of them.
How many pictures in a Google image search that aren't from the Gloat brand show up in a Gloat image search? That's a really cool way to measure.
Oh, yeah. There you go. That's an interesting one. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I love that.
Earned image search. I don't know if we could coin that
Yeah,
right
that's
there.
exactly what it is. Yeah, that's good.
Very cool. Yeah. So there was something that I mentioned on LinkedIn a little bit ago that seemed to strike a chord with you, and you told us the story of it in the context of a event you built. And I think this is kind of, we're peeling away layers of this brand story. And I think we're getting to the center of it, where everyone has a brand. It's almost like no one, you have to have a brand to exist. And whether that's your website or your color scheme, whatever you choose to call it, it is what it is. But the real brands are the ones that are kind of getting you from the 90% to 100%, right? They're thinking of that last 10% as that's what's going to define us, or that's what's going to get us stuck in everyone's head. That's what's going to get them to prefer us over others or recall us when they're thinking of purchasing something in this market. And you articulated that so well when you shared about this recent user conference that you had, and showing the attention to detail. And this is something that I think, again, it's challenging for B2B to think about, because this is the part that's almost completely disconnected from revenue metrics, right? You cannot assign the ROI of a red piano, and we'll get to that, right? It's just really hard to do that. And also it's the most work, right? That last 10% are all the details that just take so much work, and yet it's hard to really say what are we getting out of it? And yet to me, that's everything. That's what makes it the brand. And I'd love for you to take us through, like, what do you see in that 10% that to you made it worth it to go through all of that, I'm sure, pain to make that last 10% work? I would love for you to just talk through that event as a good example. And what does it get you as someone who does have to answer to the business side? What do you see it doing for you guys? I'd love to hear that part.
Yeah, this drives my team crazy a lot of times. Everything can't be done at 100%. And so I think a lot of things in marketing, it is the 80-20 and the done is better than perfect, and all those things I think have to apply on a day-to-day basis. But I think the point I made when I was posting about it, what I really think is that a lot of times that leads to unremarkable work. It can be very important work. It can fill the funnel. It can keep salespeople happy. It can get you the right number of leads. You can even have a good revenue quarter. But, I think a lot of us are in the business of marketing. We want to kind of leave our own legacy. We want to create something more remarkable. And that, I think, does happen in the final 10%. It's like the things that make something feel remarkable and memorable. And at a conference, let's be real, we could have a great conference and hit all the boxes and all the pipeline goal just by having a great venue, people fed, good content, and good opportunities for salespeople to meet with prospects. That's like all it requires. I think what we've always pushed for, though, is really thinking about every little touch point when someone shows up, making sure the speakers have handwritten cards, flowers that are Gloat red. One of the things I've tried to do, we haven't been able to scale this, but there's a book called Unreasonable Hospitality, which I recommend everyone reads. A great story of branding.
I'm in the middle of it. Dude, I'm in the middle of it now on Audible on my way to work.
We'll go through a whole thing. I've met him a bunch of times,
really?
Actually.
Oh my
God.
God.
At these LinkedIn events. He's awesome. Yeah, we'll get it. He really inspired me a lot on these things where, like, I knew someone really liked the specific type of M&Ms. So I've been pushing the team to actually find these M&Ms, which are hard to get, to be there when that person arrives. So there's these little things like that. But we also tried to get really creative. One of the things that's unique about Gloat is that you can custom brand and white label the platform. That's an amazing opportunity to celebrate our customers. So what we did this year is, instead of kind of shying away from that, we actually printed all the swag. It featured all of the brand names of the customers. So like MetLife, theirs is called My Path. For MasterCard, it's called Unlocked. For Molson Coors, the platform's called Untapped, which I love. There's all these amazing names that I think are worth celebrating. So we put them on the pillows. We even put them on all of the windows and showed how far the HQ was of that company. And so you see these people coming up and taking photos, taking selfies with their brand. And that, I think, to me is that's like that. Did we have to do that? Those are things you don't have to do. You can absolutely check the box on a good event without that. But I think that's exactly what has led to this impact, where people keep coming back and saying, wow, I look forward to Gloat Live every year because it's a very different kind of event. And we created this aura and brand around even just that event. I think you have to be selective with where you give that final 10%. But when you do, like, it really is felt. And I think people really can tell the difference. It truly leaves a mark, and it goes from, unmemorable to remarkable.
Okay. I'm jumping out of my skin to kind of reflect on what you just said, because something fascinating clicked in my mind. Check this out. We were just talking before about this opportunity to do really fast hyper personalization using digital automation and AI. And the outcome is something that's catered towards me, something that through all these touch points that are known, an asset could be created that knows me or that will do what I want. But that's not remarkable. It's just catering towards a desired outcome. Here, there's human-powered hyper-personalization, one-of-one kind of love letters, right? Basically, of decals where it's like, we cared about you so much that we told a printer to make one decal like this. That's insane, right? And all that said was the opposite of what those AI personalized ads say, which is there's a human being behind this sitting in an office trying to figure out how to make you happy, thinking their KPI is this customer excited to be with us. And that is almost like the perfect foil in a way to where things are headed in the digital world, where we're kind of removing that human element. And that's where the art can really elevate the science in my mind, where you're giving them a feeling that is driving a behavior in a way that no other kind of conditioned stimuli can do.
Yes. I love that. I totally agree with that. Yeah, that's a good observation.
Yeah, very cool. And you mentioned one of the outcomes, like just they talk about coming to your event, or they love it. And I think I saw, the amount of people that would snap photos or post on social. Are there other tangible ways that you're seeing that 10%, that attention to detail show up as, real tangible value in the business?
I think it depends on the form factor that it takes. Like for events, I think it absolutely is in the feedback, in people's likelihood to come back. Obviously, social media sharing, what are people saying in both quantity and quality? So there are definitely ways of tracking some of those things from an event, as an example. I think when you go down the list of different assets, I think the 10% applies to even demand assets. You could easily spin up something on ChatGPT now, which is like a white paper. Everyone can do an ebook like that. There's going to be a flood of these crappy ebooks. I think what's going to be the difference is it researched? Is it done in partnership with another brand, or is it delivered in an interesting form factor that maybe GPT can't produce? And I think there you just look at the numbers. I think it's going to be easy to see. It's like, hey, here's the GPT produced asset, cost per click, cost per conversion. Is it leading to actual calls? And when you have those calls, are people actually referencing the content? Because we all know we've produced assets where we know people are downloading them, but they jump on a call and they're like, oh, I don't even remember downloading that. But if it's something so compelling enough and so good, then all of a sudden they're coming to the sales team and saying, hey, I watched that whole video, or I read, and on page 7, I read this. You know what I mean? It's those dynamics, and I've seen that. Like when we produce a really good, even virtual event, or deliver a great ebook, people are coming to the conversations much more informed. We hear that from the sales team directly. We also now, you can scan some of those things in Gong, et cetera. And you can even see that in the data, like how quickly are people moving to stage 2, stage 3 in a faster way. I think a lot of that stuff is easier said than done, for sure. You have to have markups and rev ops and good attribution in place. So I don't think it's impossible actually to track some of this stuff. What I do miss, and I think a call to action to any like startups out there, and brand marketers and bigger companies have really easy ways of measuring. Like there's no brand marketer sitting at Google that's saying, oh, I don't know how to measure. They have subscriptions to Kantar and others that literally every month, every quarter, they're getting really clear aided awareness, unaided awareness, brand preference. Like they're getting the dashboard, and you see for every month, every quarter. We just don't have access to that. I think if there was a way, someone needs to solve that, I think, for B2B startups. If we can just do these longitudinal studies of things like that, awareness, brand preference, all of that, that would actually be meaningful, because boards even know what that means. These people have worked at bigger companies. So that would be meaningful to the board, not just pipeline and all that. I just don't think anyone's solved it. At least I haven't been pitched it. And I would gladly use a tool like that for pure brand tracking.
Yeah, it's almost like what came to mind is like Gong for brand, if there's such a thing.
Yeah.
Listening to the brand experiences, conversations, and kind of putting data behind
the
it.
Four walls too. That's interesting.
Exactly.
They actually would have it. They could literally they'd have to be questionable privacy wise, but they could scrape every one of our competitors and say, how many mentioned Gloat, favorably or not.
Exactly. Yeah. Wow. There is a company I came across but did not look into called Marathon that claims to be. You saw that?
I think I even signed up for it, but I don't think I ever heard back or whatever. I don't know, but that's a good one. Marathon.
It was some intense sign up that I felt like, whoa, I'm giving you a lot of info before we've even met.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yes.
If you're listening out there, if there's a world where someone from Marathon listens, we got to talk about that part. But yeah.
That's so literally
cool. I've had you for plenty of time and you're a busy man. Is there any kind of parting where brand is headed? We don't need to say the letters A and I just because it's 2025, but I'm sure that, and maybe where Gloat's brand is headed. What are you focusing on as a way of kind of anticipating where brand needs to be in general and where your brand needs to be moving forward?
Actually, it's a great segue, because that's one of the things we've been thinking about a lot as the evolution of Gloat. Like, we've been an AI first company from the beginning. I'm a power user of all these AI tools. I can't survive without them. Even in prepping for this, it's like just getting my thoughts in order, thinking about the questions, like all of that. I don't go a day without it. And I think every brand marketer, anybody in the enterprise, anybody at home, I think you're wasting an opportunity to amplify yourself and augment and what we call become a 10X kind of employee if you're not doing it. So that's the future of the Gloat brand. I also think it's the future of brand marketing is how do you find ways to amplify and augment yourself with all these amazing technologies we've been given.
Very cool. I'm excited to see how that looks and the story that you're building around it. As you mentioned, this is a next iteration of your brand that you're in the middle of, and that's exciting to me. Just to add one point to that, I'm also a heavy AI user. I'm only at like 10% of what I see myself using AI in moving forward, which is exciting and also like anxiety ridden to know like how much more there is to go. But I think, the interesting thing about what you're just saying about, the future really is the mix of AI and humans, right? That's where it is. It's not either or it's not how much, what's the percentage. It's just how do both of these things work together? That's where we're headed. And to me, it raised the question of, and then I'll show you what it means to me regarding branding. If AI could do so many human things well, how are we going to define what it is to be human? If AI is doing human things, what is uniquely human, right? At what point do we say that's something that only a human does and not AI does if so many human things are now being accomplished by non-humans? And that to me is where brand becomes so much more important. People talk about the authenticity side of it, where it's going to be more important to show authentic relationships or authentic communication. But to me, it's like where within all of this kind of range of human and machine and technology, where in it can we define the human part of it and say, this is me, meet me? And I think the ones that will be able to do that really well, the brands that could show you themselves and not just what they've been able to produce, will be the ones that end up making those stronger connections and build that trust and long-term relationships moving forward, whatever that means.
And that's why you're head of brand at one of the hottest startups on the planet, buddy. That's great. I love that. Yeah, I think it's going to be a really interesting space. I wish I had the answers on that too. I think we're all going to be learning together over the next few years what it means for brand, but also what it means for all of us. I think it's going to be an exciting time for sure. Scary, like you said, but I think exciting as well. You might have to cut this and edit it pretty heavily because, we're chatty, but hopefully people got some value out of it. I appreciate it. Always fun talking to you, though.